So today we're going to be talking about signposts. So let me open up my screen for that. All right. So these are the slides. Hopefully everyone can see it. It's hard for me to see the chat box. I'll try to check it every once in a while. But usually I have to stop share to see it. So if you have like an urgent question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask me. If not, you can throw it in the chat box and I will check it at the end. So we are going to be looking at signposts. View slideshow. So the background behind this is Signposts is actually a professional teaching book in our collection that was written by Kylene Beers and Robert Pross. They're kind of like famous in the education field for doing a lot with reading comprehension. So their background is noted on this page. So we have a past president of NCTE, high school teacher of ELA, professor emeritus, teaching English education. So they have a lot of background on how to work with students. And this is mainly aimed at like middle school students, but you can actually do this with like 4th through 12th graders, I believe, depending on like how you adjust the lesson. It's not too hard to pick up. And it's probably something you've kind of taught before, but not as like directly with a controlled vocabulary. So the problem that these researchers were looking at is with text complexity and rigor, which came up with the Common Core. And teachers were just picking books that were harder and harder to kind of push their students to learn more. But the problem is when you give them the harder books, you actually have to teach them how to read those harder books. And you could just read books at, their grade level, but look at it more in depth. So they think that the rigor and the text complexity looks at how you look at the text and what you do with it rather than like the lexile of it, right? So when you just give them like high school level text in like 7th grade, they're not used to it. Instead of asking like deep questions about the text, the kids are usually asking, what does this word mean? How do you say it? What's happening? They don't know what's going on. And it's kind of hard to like delve into those like higher comprehension and thinking skills when they're just trying to catch up, right? So their goal was to get to the higher order thinking skills by noticing the elements in text. So we talk about the story element of like plot, character, setting, and there's a whole bunch of other things you can look at. You can look at symbols, allegory, all of that stuff, depending on like how advanced your kids are, right? So when the teachers noticed that they were using the signpost method instead of just trying to push their kids to like the next higher reading level, the kids were using and asking more questions using visualizing, predicting, summarizing, clarifying, questioning, inferring, making connections. So these are all of our higher order thinking skills with like reading comprehension and what you'll see in the Common Core standards. So what are signposts? Signposts are elements that occur in all books across all genres. They started signposts to kind of look like signal phrases. So they're like sets of phrases and words in books that mark a story element. And they actually have these for nonfiction too, but today we're just going to go through the literature ones. And then each signpost comes with one anchor question, and there's a reason they have one instead of multiple, and we'll get into that. But there's one anchor question that asks the kids to like delve further into like what that element means for the story, right? There's people stuck in the waiting room. Hang on 2 seconds. Hi, sorry if you were stuck in the waiting room. All right, so why are we doing anchor questions in the first place? So students are going to notice something in the text, so the signpost using the signal phrase, and they're going to stop to note what it might mean for the text, right? So thinking about what the signpost might mean requires that students ask themselves the anchor question. So we picked one anchor question, and originally these researchers had a ton, but what they realized was when they asked more questions, the kids were just waiting for the teachers to give them the answers instead of kind of going into the text themselves and formulating their own questions and predictions for the text. So it's this one question that moved them into deeper thinking and discussion with their classmates and further questioning, where they're not relying on the teachers for the answers, but trying to generate the answers for themselves first. So yes, you as a teacher, you're going to structure the discussion, but you don't want them to be waiting for your questions and then waiting for what answer is right. You want them to kind of talk about it amongst themselves first. So not too many leading questions, which is why there's only one. So before I go into the signposts, I'm going to read our mentor text. Sorry if you can't see all the words. I haven't had practice in a while doing online story time. So this book is one of my favorites. It's called After the Fall. And so when you're looking at a mentor text and you can go in depth, like you can read this with high school students. It was considered for Caldecott, like adults read this and you can go into like a lot of depth, or you can just look at it shallowly depending on like how old your kids are. You can use different types of mentor texts. They don't have to be picture books. They can be longer books. They can be short stories. It could be an excerpt from a chapter book or a part of a book that you're reading in class with the kids, right? So this is After the Fall. So you have Humpty Dumpty and he's falling off the wall. And it says, I'm trying to move it around. My name is Humpty Dumpty. This was my favorite spot high up on the wall. I know it's an odd place for an egg to be, but I loved being close to the birds. Then one day I fell. I'm sort of famous for that part. Folks called it the Great Fall, which sounds a little grand. It was just an accident, but it changed my life. Fortunately, all the king's men managed to put me back together. Well, most of me. There were some parts that couldn't be healed with bandages and glue. So he's sleeping on the floor and his bunk bed's up there. Now it's hard to see the details. After that day, I became afraid of heights. I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying some of my favorite things. So there's like one of those rolly ladders, and he's trying to get to the good cereal, but he gave up. I walked past the wall every day, and I would think about climbing the ladder again. I really missed the birds and being high above the city, but I could never do it because I knew that accidents can happen. I eventually settled for watching the birds from the ground. It wasn't the same, but it was better than nothing. Then one day, an idea flew by. So he's looking up in binoculars at a paper airplane, and all the birds are way up there. Making planes was harder than I thought. It was easy to get cuts and scrapes and scratches, but day after day, I kept trying and trying until I got it just right. So this is the bird he made out of paper. My plane was perfect and it flew like nothing could stop it. I hadn't felt that happy in a long time. It wasn't the same as being up in the sky with the birds, but it was close enough. Unfortunately, accidents happen. And you can always have them make a prediction here if you want. They always do. So here he is looking at his paper bird. It's flying over the wall. I almost walked away again, but then I thought about all the time I'd spent working on my plane and all the other things I'd miss. I decided I was going to climb that wall, but the higher I got, the more nervous I felt. I didn't want to admit it. I was terrified. I didn't look up. I didn't look down. I just kept climbing one step at a time until I was no longer afraid. So he's at the top cheering. Maybe now you won't think of me as that egg who is famous for falling. Hopefully you'll remember me as the egg who got back up. So he's turning into a bird, very metaphorical, and learned how to fly. I think that might be the end. Yep. And then we have the city. And then there's actually a page on the back, and it says, life begins when you get back up. So it's a good summary for the text that they usually put on the back of a cover anyways, but it also is almost part of the story. So when we look at this, we're going to use our signposts. So the first one, I'm just going to check the chat real quick. Awesome. Thank you for sharing the Google Docs. Okay, so let's look at the first one. And if you can't get in, I'll help you get the slides in after too, so you don't have to take all the notes. So contrasts and contradictions is the first signpost. So the definition is, this is a point in the novel at which Characters' actions or thoughts clearly contradict previous patterns or contrast with patterns the reader would normally expect, suggesting change or offering new insight into the character. Other contrasts and contradictions might offer insight into internal conflict, theme, or relationship of the setting to the plot. So when you're going to teach story elements, if you're teaching them separately, which I don't know if I'd recommend, but if you're teaching them one at a time, you can pick out which signposts lead to that story element, right? And then our anchor question that goes with contrasts and contradictions is, why would the character act or feel that way? So contrasts and contradictions shows us other aspects of a character or a setting. This question encourages conversation about character, motivation, or the situation that he's in. Okay, so when we're looking at Humpty Dumpty, put in the chat if you noticed a contrast and contradiction. Like, what did you notice? What would be the part where Humpty Dumpty contradicts himself and what he usually does? So I'll give you guys a minute to guess which one you think the contrast and contradiction is. There can be multiple throughout a text, but usually in a picture book, there's only like one or two. Come on, guys, earn your participation points. All right, I'll give you this one. So what I had for contrast and contradictions is this scene right here. So Humpty used to like sitting on the wall and watching the birds. That was his thing. So he's not afraid of heights. Bird watching was his hobby. Now he's afraid of heights because he fell off. So this shows his internal conflict is overcoming his fears. And then we also see the contrast of the setting of the wall versus Humpty's location physically, which is why I like this book so much for Caldecott. So it shows how the plot progresses. So like slowly the difference between the height and him get closer together until he's on top of the wall again, right? But the contrast is like right here, all the good cereals on top, and you see that ladder again. So like the ladder keeps repeating, it even almost looks the same, right? And Humpty Dumpty is getting the boring O's or the bow rings as his cereal because he's too afraid to go to the top and get what he really wants, right? So it's internal conflict. He can't get what he wants because of his fear. All right, let's look at the next one. So they call this one aha moments. So this is moments when a character's sudden insight or understanding helps us understand the plot's movement, the development of the character, of the internal conflict he faces. An aha moment is almost always revealed with a very direct language students can be taught to watch for, especially in like the younger kids books. Sometimes if it's a graphic novel, you can see that people go like that, like they have a light bulb like literally above their head, right? So the characters will say, I realized, or I suddenly understood, or it came to me that, or now I know. So like the signal phrases are really clear for this one. And then the anchor question that we use for it is, how might this change things? So aha moments reveals change. So the question focuses on that change for the character or the setting. So what do we think was Humpty Dumpty's aha moment and after the fall? What did he suddenly realize or understand? So if you think you have an idea.
Would it be at the end when he said, it's not how many times I fall, but if I get back up? Or is that?
Yeah, that could be one. I feel like there's like several in this book where they just repeat it a couple times. So you can even use it as repetition. Any other scenes that people saw? Getting back up after you fall. Yeah. Carrie wrote that. So the scene that I put on, and I feel like there's several in this book. So I would also talk to students and be like, sometimes there's multiple signposts. So it's not always just one right answer, right? So I had this scene where he's like, flying off the ledge. Says Humpty realizes that he has to face his fears to overcome them. This changes things because now he can enjoy his favorite hobbies again. So with picture books, sometimes the signal phrases are more visual than anything. So depending on like what you're teaching, you might want to do an excerpt too of like a chapter or something of a book you guys are reading so that you can show the actual signal phrases because sometimes they'll be there and sometimes they're just implied, right? Okay. Our next one is tough questions. So this is the point when the main character pauses to ask himself or a trusted other tough questions. Sometimes these questions appear not as questions, but as statement, often with the word wonder in it. So I wonder what I should do about whatever. These moments of uncertainty give readers insight into the character's development, his internal conflicts, or perhaps themes. So maybe he is mulling over the theme. Maybe he is conflicted about something and can't decide what to do. Or maybe he's changing from how he used to be, right? So for this tough questions, I didn't really see one in After the Fall, but I saw one in another short book that I read, so I'm going to read that one too. But let me just share with you the anchor question. And don't feel like you have to write this down because you will get all the slides. And if you can't open them, I will email them to you. So the anchor question for this is, what does this question make me wonder about? So the character is wondering about something, but it can also be prompted into like, text to self connections about the world. So tough questions almost always reveal internal conflict and understanding that conflict generally offers insight into the theme. Readers are making a connection between the author's thinking and their own thoughts. So you can actually ask your students the same tough question, or you can say, how would you answer this question? Or how would the character answer this? How might they have answered it before they asked this question versus now? So it shows a lot of different developmental things.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I wasn't here at the very beginning. Is it just the typical Humpty Dumpty poem?
No, it's a book called After the Fall. So it's basically a retelling of Humpty Dumpty, but it kind of talks about his anxiety to like go up to different heights. But for tough questions, I'm actually going to read one more book to you real quick. And this is being recorded, so you can always go back and like look at how we looked at the text. So the other book that I wanted to share with you, just making sure I have time, is The Bad Seed by Jory John. So I'm going to try to move so you guys can actually see some of it. I'm a bad seed. A bad seed. Oh, yeah, it's true. The other seeds, they look at me and they say, that seed is so bad. When they think I'm not listening, they mumble, there goes the bad seed. But I can hear them. I have good hearing for a seed. How bad am I? You really want to know? Well, I never put things back where they belong. I'm late to everything. I tell long jokes with no punchlines. I never wash my hands or my feet. I lie about pointless stuff. I cut in line every time. It's really hard to read to a camera lens. I stare at everybody. I glare at everybody. I finish everybody's sentences and I never listen. And I do lots of other bad things too. Know why? Because I'm a bad seed. A bad seed. I just can't help it. Sure, I wasn't always this bad. I was born a humble seed on a simple sunflower in an unremarkable field. I had a big family, seeds everywhere. We found ways of having fun. We were close. But then the petals dropped and our flowers drooped. They're all falling out. It's kind of a blur. I remember a bag. Everything went dark. And then a giant. I thought I was a goner. I thought I was done for. I screamed and I hollered, ah! But I was spit out at the last possible second. I flew through the air and I landed under the bleachers with a huge thud. When I woke up, it was dark outside. A wad of gum had softened my fall. I felt okay, but something had changed in me. I'd become a different seed entirely. I'd become a bad seed. A bad seed. That's right. I stopped smiling. I kept to myself. I drifted. I was friend to nobody and bad to everybody. I was lost on purpose. I lived in a soda can. I didn't care and it suited me. Until recently. So we see our contradiction here, right? I've made a big decision. I've decided I don't want to be a bad seed anymore. I'm ready to be happy. That could be our aha moment. It's hard to be good when you're so used to being bad, but I'm trying. I'm taking it one day at a time. Sure, I still forget to listen, and I still show up late, and I still talk during movies, and I do all kinds of other bad stuff. But I also say thank you, and I say please, and I smile, and I hold open doors for people. Not always, but sometimes. And even though I still feel bad sometimes, I also feel kind of good. It's sort of a mix. All I can do is keep trying and keep thinking, maybe I'm not such a bad seed after all. Hey, look, there goes that bad seed. Actually, he's not that bad anymore. I heard that. That's the end of ours. So for this one, we saw some other signposts, but when it comes to tough questions, what do you think the question was that he asked? Do you remember? I know it's hard when you can't go back to the text. Anybody have a guess?
I don't remember the question, but I know he stated that, like, that internal conflict where he's like, I don't want to be a bad seed anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that one's not the question. That one's not like a tough question. But that could also be like an aha moment where he realizes he doesn't want to be the same. So like the aha moments also talk about insight into internal conflict, and you can bring that up with your students too. So like what I do when I read it is I mark all the signposts that I can see, and then maybe I pick one example of each one. And then if there are more, you can ask the students to find more also.
So could it have been, why am I a bad seed?
Yeah, that's kind of what I had. So this one right here, I tried to copy those parts of the text. So how bad am I? Do you really want to know? And so he kind of has an attitude, a lot like some kids have an attitude about it, right? But what I looked at is it shows that, at first he thinks that he's beyond saving. He thinks he's really bad and no one can help him. He's kind of copying attitude, even though we know that like he feels vulnerable and stuff. He sounds like a tough guy. He's trying to impress the reader. But it also shows the beginning of character development for him, going from like this point of being bad and there's no point of return, to the theme of turning his life around, right? So he's asking, do you really want to know? Like, do you even care how bad I am? Does it even matter? So that's also a question you can ask your students. Like, does it matter how people behave or how people perceive you? Like, if you're good and they think you're bad, or you're bad and they think you're good. So those are other conversations you can get into, but try to let like the kids bring that stuff up too, so they're not just relying on you for all the questions, right? And also, like when they give their answers, I would just write all of them down so you have a collection, because a lot of times, several of them will be right. Okay. The next signpost is words of the wiser. And the reason I'm basically reading off the screen is because I want you to have these notes when you go to print the slides instead of just showing you pictures. So words of the wiser is a scene in which a wiser and often older character offers a life lesson of some sort to the protagonist. So a lot of times you'll see them like sitting with their grandpa or a mentor or something like that, or a teacher. This lesson often emerges as a theme of the novel. The moment is often announced by placing the younger main character off alone with the older, wiser character in a quiet, meditative, often solemn moment. So if they're like, "Come here, kid, let's go for a walk," and they go to sit on a bench, you're like, "Oh, this is the words of the wiser," right? In these moments, the reader sees a guiding lesson that transcends the conflict in the novel. They gain insight into a theme. And then when we look at what do we ask the kids when they find this moment, our anchor question is, what's the life lesson and how might it affect the character? You can also ask them to apply it to themselves. Like, have you ever tried to learn this lesson, or you learned this from like someone else? talk about that moment in time, like how did it affect you? Who talked to you about it? Like, was it your grandpa? Like, what's your relationship with him? So that can kind of talk about like how people gain wisdom. So the words of the wiser suggest the theme. And you can use this question to help the readers think about the theme in context of the character's life. So does this change what their character ends up ultimately doing? Does he take the advice or not? And then you can turn it back on them, right? So we're going to look at After the Fall again. And this one's hard because it's in a picture book, so you don't always get them directly as you would in like a chapter book, right? That's why the teacher guides that are also in that Google document folder for a lot of the books that you guys have been doing with your students, there's a whole bunch of them written out, and you can see the excerpts. It'll tell you like what page in the book, what's happening, and then the answer to the anchor question. So what do you think the words of the wiser is in After the Fall? He doesn't talk to anybody else, right? Any guesses? This one's tricky.
Maybe that it's okay to not be perfect or be able to do everything, and then, to try and overcome those things.
Right. And tying it back to the signpost, do you remember when that advice was given in the book? It's hard without a copy and looking at it a couple of times.
Was it at the end?
Yeah, it was. It was like the sneaky thing in the back, right? So we have life begins when you get back up. So a lot of times this will happen with picture books, so be careful to look like at the end pages and stuff. So we have like the theme of trying again and living your full life, just like you said. Readers can think about this theme in context of Humpty's actions throughout the text, like when is he getting back up? What's the process of it? At what point do you think he reaches that turning point? What encouraged him to make that? And like you could even ask them for this one, since it's tricky, like who is the person giving this advice? So here we kind of see it as either the author's doing it, or like Humpty Dumpty is telling us that after he learns his like whole lesson, right? Because this whole story is like a flashback.
Like this aha moment.
Yeah.
So having not read
Yeah.
the story or listened to the story and thinking of the poem, I'm just thinking that, he made a bad choice sitting on the edge. He fell, he broke. People helped him get up and give him another opportunity, and now he has to make choices.
Yeah, kind of. And like this one also didn't see it as a choice. It was like